right, ladies and gentlemen, or should I say gentlemen and ma'am, thank you very much for listening to this latest edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And fuck, my coffee's empty, Phil. I should have thought of that before we started. I really was disappointed by that realization. But you know what I'm not disappointed by, Phil? This upcoming UFC card.
Yes.
Oh, please. No, I pretend I didn't say that. You guess.
This upcoming UFC card.
Wrong. It's actually just the main event. The whole main card, in fact. And that's really going to be I think the entire focus of today's episode. Last weekend's card was fantastic. We may manage to squeeze in some discussion for a bonus episode on the Patreon. And if you don't see that this week, then you're going to see us answering heavy bag questions for the first time in ages. And that means that I need to demand that all of you wonderful people who have supported the show on Patreon at the $5 level send in more questions. And if you don't see the questions there this week, that will be because there will be some Covington Woodley content instead. There will be bonus episodes coming, I swear, but you also should never trust me. So, the main event of UFC 253. It's Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. It's here. It's exceedingly gay. It's the horniest main event I think I can remember ever happening. And the trash talk has been really, really uncomfortable. There has been an extreme level of sexual tension between Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa, two men who have both sworn in exactly these words, to make the other man their bitch. And we're all here to see it, folks. I'm genuinely very excited, Phil. It's a hell of a good fight. Like, we just spent half an hour trying to figure out what the hell is going to happen, and there's so many possibilities. It's like a really good story, because the premise, like just the setup, is really clear. The conflict is obvious. This guy's going to want to do this thing. This guy's going to want to do this completely opposite thing. But how that plays out, and that really is the recipe for a fantastic fight. You know exactly what each guy wants to do, but boy, is it hard to actually predict with any degree of certainty who's going to succeed, how much, when. I don't know. Are you as excited as I am, Phil?
Yeah, this is an absolutely stellar fight. I mean, it's one of those ones where the style matchup just seems like it cannot fail to offer excitement. Paulo Costa is pretty much guaranteed excitement, I think, because the man doesn't stop coming forward. He throws with huge power. He doesn't seem to get particularly tired. He's just one of the... He's been a great scrambler. It's hard. He's one of these guys where it's hard to imagine a boring fight. And as such, he seems like someone who's going to be able to really push Israel Adesanya.
And Israel Adesanya, I would also apply the label guaranteed excitement to him. And I say that having not thought about him or seen any of his fights since 2019. I assume he's been inactive all year.
Yeah. Let's say that happened.
It will not be the Romero fight. I know we were excited and jazzed about that, but I can't imagine. Like, Paulo Costa, he's a simple man, Phil. He just wants to come forward and beat up a guy until the guy agrees to kiss him. It's all he wants in the world, and he is determined to do that as hard as possible for as long as it takes. All right, so we're also going to, I guess, before we dive into it, and we're going to dive in just a moment, we're also going to discuss the co-main event. Dominic Reyes versus, it's the two true light heavyweight champions, I think. Dominic Reyes versus Jan Blachowicz. And they're really just fighting for a chance to keep the throne warm for actually the other only true light heavyweight champion, Thiago Santos. That rules. Flyweights Kai Kara France and Brandon Royval, who made a very big splash, beating Tim Elliott in his last fight. That's awesome. Guaranteed action there. And then on the prelims, we've also got, in the featured prelim spot, Brad Riddell, every Fight Site listener just creamed their jeans at the mere mention of his name, taking on another like Dutch-style kickboxer, and Alex da Silva, that is also a banger of a matchup. And there's some other good stuff on the card. There's a debuting guy, Ludovic Klein, who looks pretty good. We're mostly going to discuss those name matchups, though, and I can't wait to get to the rest. But I'm going to have to, because Paulo Costa, Israel Adesanya. Phil, we've said it over and over. The dynamic is pretty clear. We may as well put our cards on the table and say what that means. Paulo Costa is going to come forward. He's going to do it a lot.
Yep.
While he's doing that, he's going to hit the body. That is a very interesting layer to bring against Adesanya. Something that I basically just internally scream every time I'm watching a big puncher in MMA is for them to go to the body. There's absolutely no reason not to. Breadbasket is the ideal home for a naturally heavy hand. And in particular, against someone like Adesanya, who relies so much on footwork and head movement and this sort of tricky, almost improvisational upper body defense, the body shots are guaranteed to confuse that defense, and more to the point, they're going to land where the headshots don't, and therefore set the headshots up. Lots of pressure, combinations, attritional strikes. Is it just me, or does Paulo Costa seem in some ways like a nightmarishly difficult matchup for Israel Adesanya?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned before that Adesanya isn't like a natural counterpuncher in the way he sets up his shot, so he's not someone with a huge amount of like power either. I think that's fair to say.
Mm-hmm. So
we've seen him. He's generally
accurate.
Sorry?
Though he is remarkably accurate.
Yeah, he's generally knocked people out due to perfect positioning
mm-hmm.
or just an accumulation of damage, as
mm-hmm.
with Gastelum. So, yeah, it's going to be a real task for him to keep Costa off him. I think, like you said, the upper body movement, I think Adesanya's tendency to kind of leave his hands out there,
yep.
To control like returning strikes or to like catch, like he likes to leave his right hand out there to catch the left hook on the return. All that kind of stuff seems like, it would work well with both Costa's willingness to attack the clinch and to go for body strikes.
Absolutely, the body strikes.
A lot of, I do think so. I think the main advantage that Adesanya has is obviously it's not a subtle one. It's just defense.
Yeah.
Costa has improved in terms of his shot selection, his cage cutting. I think it was Jack Slack on Twitter who was like 4 years ago or something. Costa just decided to get good. Like he just completely changes who he is as a fighter. But I think one of the things which
is that true? I haven't seen his earlier fights.
I believe so. Yeah.
Have to check those out.
But I mean, yeah, because it's difficult to think, but we haven't really seen him fight that many people in the UFC.
No, he's had a quick, rapid rise, much like Adesanya's own.
Yeah, and against a generally far lower level of competition. I mean, his first 3 fights were completely meaningless.
Yes, although I will say... go on, sorry.
I mean, Gareth McClellan, Oluwale Bangbosh, and the poor, ruined, sad ghost Johnny Hendricks in one of the most evil bookings I've ever seen the UFC make.
The paunchy specter of Johnny Hendricks. Yes. But I will say the last 2, I think, have been very instructive as to where Costa's ceiling actually lies. I think Uriah Hall delivered probably his best ever performance in losing to Costa. He exposed, or at least, underscored a lot of the openings in Costa's game, which we will get into, things that Adesanya can definitely exploit just as well, if not better than Hall did, but also Yoel Romero. I mean, I don't give a shit who the fuck you fought in your first 4 UFC fights. If you beat Yoel Romero, If you beat a Yoel Romero who is like using jabs and countering in the pocket and doing it well, then that means a lot to me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this and Romero would go on basically prove that he's still, this wasn't some, young guy just catching an old guy at the right time.
Yeah.
Like Romero, I mean, this was a terrible, brutal physical match that he had with Romero, and he, sort of came out on top of it. It's notable that there's an argument for Romero winning that fight, but there's, as we discussed on this very show, there's an argument for Romero winning the Adesanya fight as well.
There's an argument for him winning virtually every fight.
Yeah, I think the only one that you can look at and say that he clearly lost was the first Whittaker fight.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So we've seen some interesting things from Costa that I think will be helpful. Someone on Twitter, I think, pointed out, and I'm sorry for forgetting who this was.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry. Was pointing out that Costa has been training, doubling up on his lead hands, slipping into things. We have seen Adesanya troubled by people doubling up on lead hands and sort of using this to kind of close distance to push him out of position. Holloway, Aldo-esque.
Mm-hmm. Just like Anderson Silva before him.
Because he's such a kind of leaning, trunk defense heavy fighter. Mm-hmm. It just makes sense. They're combined, but he's been combining that with body work. All that works well. I think, again, I am probably going to stick by my assertion that Costa is going to need to come with defense that we haven't seen from him yet. We've seen him training slips and moving inside, which, Gastelum, with occasional shocking moments of brilliance, was able to use to kind of roll and come inside against Adesanya. But we haven't seen him do it. Every time he's been in the cage, he's been a bit of a damage sponge.
Yeah.
And whilst I think Adesanya can get away from the cage enough times, he can pivot, he can pivot off clinches, he's a very accurate jabber. I think the problem with Costa is that the amount of damage he's going to be soaking up chasing Adesanya down is just going to be too much. It's going to be a stupid. It's going to sound like a stupid comparison, but I think I remembered Holly Holm against Ronda Rousey, when people basically said, Holly Holm's pretty pillow-fisted. How is she going to stay away from Rousey for 5 rounds? And I remember thinking, she soaks up so much damage. It's not going to matter how sort of pillow-fisted Holly Holm is that much.
Also, being pillow-fisted,
I just found myself instinctively.
It doesn't matter when the other person is running into your strikes. We've discussed that many times. But no matter how light a puncher you are, I don't even have to throw a punch out. Just imagine I can just stick my arm out, and as long as the elbow's reasonably straight and it can absorb a shock, if you run into it, it's gonna fuck you up. Imagine running into the end of a broom handle. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be coming at you even. You're gonna hurt yourself running into it. So yeah, I don't think. That was, as you predicted, Phil, a phenomenally stupid comparison. But no, I think it's very fair that Adesanya's power is going to tell in this fight more than it does, because this is by far the most committed, aggressive opponent he's ever faced in the UFC. I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
So here's,
I think there's a lot of things to like about Costa. He stays over his own feet, unlike Whittaker.
Mm-hmm.
He throws strikes which cut the cage off, big body kicker and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things to like, but I just feel like he's going to spend too much damage to get into the kill zone.
So here's the dynamic, right? Costa is. This makes things interesting. We've talked in the past about Adesanya being a bit of a slow starter. He needs to get his reads. He's a read-based fighter to his core, so he needs to get a look at someone before he feels comfortable letting things go. Costa's not the same way. He's an incredibly fast starter. So the immediate thought for me is, well, that's going to be a very tough beginning for Adesanya. But I think you may be right that Costa's extreme aggression is going to demand counter responses from Adesanya. And if he just takes the most basic cue from the Uriah Hall fight, he can light Costa up with jabs and use that to maintain the range, to consistently pivot away, and force Costa to reset his feet. That is absolutely an open opportunity for Adesanya to exploit. But the thing is Costa's a fast starter, but in many ways he does get better as the fight goes on. He actually becomes a significantly more subtle pressure fighter. He starts to feint and disguise his entries. He's apparently, I mean, I can't make any concrete guesses as to how this will show up in the fight, but he has apparently been working on his lever punching, doubling up off the same hand. But already, we have seen him have effects on people by mixing feints into his combinations, something I always like to see when you nail someone with a hard shot and then just pump the other hand and come back with the hand that you just landed. Sort of a similar rhythm-breaking effect to a lever punch. And so if the entries get more sophisticated, as Adesanya is maybe getting more comfortable, I don't know. Here, I'll say this. You're right. Like, Costa's defense it's bad. It's just a double forearm guard. I'm confident that if he does develop some slipping and rolling, he will become an absolutely devastating fighter, as if he isn't already. But the man is so offensively minded. You know that the moment he gets comfortable slipping a jab, you don't even have to teach him to come back with the right hand after that. That's what he wants to do. So I think that'll be a massive improvement. And if he does come in with that, this instantly, to me, becomes a very different fight. A much more difficult one for Adesanya. But what really matters to me is, even if he doesn't come in with that defense, he is unique to all of Adesanya's other opponents. And I think maybe the best parallel for this kind of matchup is someone like Marvin Vettori, who gave Adesanya some trouble with tricky hand timing games and pressure. Is that unlike Vettori, Costa doesn't. He expects to absorb that damage. Granted, he's probably never absorbed the kind of damage that Adesanya is going to hand out, but he'd never handled the kind of damage that Uriah Hall gave him either. And it only invited more pressure. Now, it got him knocked down coming in at one point. But there was also a moment in that fight where Costa realized he was eating a billion jabs and didn't like that to continue happening, wanted to continue exchanging, so he just started trading jabs. He was like, Uriah Hall's going to hit me with his left, I'm just going to stick mine out as he does it. And just being willing, 100% willing to eat the shot in order to punish the person for throwing it at you, especially with a power differential. Uriah Hall is a big puncher. That was probably should have been a difficult decision to just trade jabs with him. Israel Adesanya is sharp, but he's not as big a puncher as Uriah Hall. And I have no doubt that even if Costa's soaking up a lot of damage early, he's going to turn those losing moments into exchanges. And in those exchanges, he's going to be hitting the body. In those exchanges, he's going to be crashing into the clinch. He's going to be ending those exchanges with body kicks, almost certainly. It's just very interesting. I don't know. It seems impossible that Adesanya is going to successfully keep him off the whole time. That almost seems like a painfully obvious statement. There's the fact that Adesanya has the clinches, the angles out of the clinches, the strikes on breaks that you mentioned. I think those are all obviously great tools to have in the kit for somebody who is going to be crashing into you. But I don't know, man. Adesanya might have lost that fight to Vettori, and it was a much less confident pressure striking performance than what I expect Costa to deliver here. Granted, Adesanya's probably gotten better and more comfortable at MMA since, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's. I think of the two people who we think of as the finished product. I think the finished product is almost certainly Adesanya, right?
Yeah.
The one who I'd be far less surprised to see major improvements from is Costa.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you just want to say that, like, Adesanya's toughest problems have been from bricked up guys who come forward and push him back into the fence, like it's just Vittorio and Gastelum.
And of course, Rob Wilkinson, world famous bodybuilder.
Yes, and yes, devastating athlete.
Okay, so there's one more thing one more topic I want to tackle, because this is where I came into this fully prepared to pick Costa, actually, because the basic dynamic is so different. And it seems, again, impossible that Adesanya is going to be able to actually refuse that pressure for the entirety of a fight. I just don't think Costa responds the same way to being punished. I think he just wants to punish in return. But you raised a very interesting point, which is that, like, as with Whittaker before Adesanya, we were blind to what ended up being the really key dynamic in that fight, which is what happens when Whittaker doesn't have an opponent who stands in front of him. Right? We saw the Romero fights, for example, and Whittaker had all these beautiful, subtle setups. He didn't have to leap insanely across space. Everything came off the jab and the feints, things he's very good at. And we expected these tools to help him bridge the gap and get to Adesanya safely. And what happened instead is we found out that Adesanya's footwork is better than Yoel Romero's, or at the very least, it's more evasive. And he was consistently putting himself into positions where it turned out Whittaker's primary response was to lunge at him. And I would say, from what I've seen, Paulo Costa has good cage-cutting footwork. Like, at the very least, you can say he knows what he's supposed to be doing. He doesn't follow people around. He keeps himself between them and the center of the octagon as often as possible. And when they slip out the side, he takes the shortcut, takes a straight line to get right back in front of them. But the guys he's done this against have been Yoel Romero, who we, learned that lesson from Robert Whittaker, not to take any pressuring success against him too seriously, and Uriah Hall, who, again, I think had an amazingly good performance and had some of his best footwork, but is also someone we have seen, you pointed this out earlier, Phil, we've seen him pushed to the cage and beaten up in numerous fights. So there's a really big question about how Costa responds to someone who can, like, get him to throw a strike and then pivot out to the side, or who can meet him in the clinch and then step off to the side as he lands a strike. It's a big question, and my gut says that Costa's going to make these things difficult just by design. He's got the corralling circular strikes, the body kicks, the hooks. He's got the cage cutting footwork, but I have yet to see it pressure tested against a really good, creative, evasive fighter. So it's a big question mark. I don't know. I mean, you kind of swayed me, Phil, but I've kind of unswayed myself. Like, I don't know. I don't know who to pick. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just that, like, I think a lot of, I'm concerned by how much does Costa need the cage, I think, is one of the major questions. How much does his subtlety on entry, his ability to, like, throw in combination, and his ability to mix his shots up, how much does it get better when he has people backed into the cage?
Yeah, and on that note,
can he survive open stance? I mean, just open ground kickboxing matches, because the Romero fight started and it was Romero was just instantly on the cage, and he just spent the entire first round there.
Yep,
mostly kind of getting beaten up.
But whenever he used his jab to keep distance and get into open space, whenever he came forward with combinations, very, very successful against Costa's defense. And to your point, we should remind ourselves this is going to be taking place on Fight Peninsula, meaning 30-foot octagon, not the Apex Center 25-footer. And This is the kind of matchup.
Ah, interesting. Didn't actually know.
This is the kind of matchup where that matters, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's also the fact that this is another thing that you pointed out earlier. Romero absolutely won the third round against Paulo Costa. On volume, on clean strikes, Costa faded more than Romero, which is patently unfair. Because as far as we can tell...
Yeah, it's just cheating. It's just cheating.
As far as we can tell, he exhausted himself hitting Romero in the body, which is absolutely cheating. But, you know, provided Adesanya's durability and or defense holds up, and he is delivering all of this sniping attrition and building these attacks and confusing Costa like we're expecting, does Costa actually have the stamina to... God, you know what sucks about this, Phil? Each time I raise a point, there's an obvious counter, which is, how good is Adesanya's stamina if he's getting hit in the body constantly? We don't know that. We haven't seen it in MMA, at least.
Yeah, and Adesanya has just never had, like, a really high-paced fight in the UFC. Like, just hasn't. I mean, Whittaker was, you know, the Whittaker fight wasn't... It was not Whittaker's usual pace because he couldn't get the entries going. The Romero fight was crushingly slow-paced. I mean, I guess Vettori...
Yeah, reasonably, but even then, like I said, Vettori had kind of a hitch in his step trying to get his pressure going in that fight. It was I don't know, it was constantly frustrated pressure from him. And again, yeah, Costa, like, I've spoken about this sort of dynamic before, but he has a doer's process-driven mindset where I think in his head, he eats these jabs coming in and doesn't for one moment think, uh-oh, I don't want that to happen. Which is very clearly what happened to Marvin Vettori, who started out pressuring a lot and then took like 8 minutes convincing himself to start pressuring hard again because Adesanya was stinging him, and he didn't like it happening. Costa's response to Uriah Hall's jab was to exchange jabs with him and then continue to come forward. He treats those shots as part of the process of the kind of fight he knows he can win. He expects to eat that damage, and it does not dissuade him. In fact, it encourages him to press forward more aggressively. I think just to make it interesting, because I sense you're picking Adesanya, I might take Costa here. I came in prepared to do that. I thought you were going to flip me. I think my gut even now is starting to say Adesanya, but I don't know. I don't know how he deals with someone that he can't keep off. And if he does keep Costa off, I'll be immensely impressed. And I do think it's possible, but I just don't know how he deals with someone who just doesn't mind being hit.
Yeah. I mean, and as we said, like, Costa has shown marked, impressive, genuine improvement in many areas across his, like, UFC run. If he can put defense, he can put lever punching into his game. He still has nasty tricks. Like, he doesn't have much striking defense, but that lead hook that he dropped Romero with is vicious.
Yeah, like,
it is far quicker than any other punch he throws.
Yeah, it's a nasty left hook, and that's the shot that it initiated the ending of the Uriah Hall fight. Hall did something very Adesanya-esque, in fact, that he had Costa pushing him back. Of course, granted, he did have his back near the cage, but he stung him with a 1-2 coming in, saw the opening for his left hook, and as he was uncorking it, Costa's left hook got there twice as fast and rocked him, and that was the end of the fight, basically. It's a very good punch, and it's a particularly good counter to have in your back pocket if you just don't mind exchanging with someone, which he won't.
Yeah, because Adesanya does like to lean into his jab.
Yep. To, like,
spike people from distance. If Costa just steps forward, like, it wouldn't be the first time that Adesanya had just got clobbered by a left hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you sort of suggested maybe you thought it might be a little reductive, but I don't think it's unfair to say that Adesanya struggles with left hooks in particular.
Yeah, I think I am going to pick Adesanya. I can't trust that that Costa's defense is going to be there.
Yep.
And I think if it isn't there, I think it could actually be like a really ugly fight for him if he gets if he's getting hurt and he's having to chase. He's having to lose like 3 to 4 exchanges every time he has to put Adesanya back on the fence.
Yep.
If he gets into a position where he's really down on damage, he's just going to get absolutely chainsawed because he doesn't have there's nothing in him which will stop him from getting chainsawed. He'll just be a hurt person who is coming forward with no defense. Just
like Whitaker, he could very easily get into a downward spiral where his only answer to the things that are causing him to get hurt is to do them more recklessly.
Yeah. I think I'm going to pick Adesanya probably by third round knockout.
That sounds eminently possible.
This is tremendous fight. One of the most it's got to be one of the most thrilling matchups. It is the most thrilling matchup this year, apart from just Khabib Gaethje.
Yep. No. Yeah. This is matchup of the year material, undoubtedly.
And that fight isn't nearly as sizzlingly homoerotic as this is.
No. This is so much hornier than Khabib Gaethje. That's a definite element. And man, when Costa eats all these jabs and then he comes out, looking like Ricky Martin with big swollen red lips like he had at the end of the Hall fight. Oh, that is a picture. That is a picture of... I'm sorry. We have to take a break from the podcast. I have to run to the bathroom for unrelated reasons. When we come back, Dominic Reyes versus Jan Blachowicz, Kai Kara-France versus Brandon Royval, Brad Riddell versus Alex De Silva, and maybe more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Phil and I just spent about 15 minutes watching, rewatching, commentating, and then making a GIF of the end of round 1 between Jan Blachowicz and Luke Rockhold. Maybe one of the funniest and most underappreciated hilarious moments in UFC history. Rockhold doing just the silliest spin as Blachowicz hits him in the back of the head, turning around just in time to get dropped by a silly ass head kick. Herb Dean almost getting kicked in the face as he tries to break up this exchange. And then Rockhold comes out in round 1, just with the dumbest, most meat-headed aggression, and immediately gets rocked. It's really a beautiful fight. The perfect light heavyweight debut for Luke Rockhold, and a perfect example of why Jan Blachowicz is the uncrowned king in the light heavyweight division. Actually, I gotta be honest, Phil, I'm shocked. Truly I am, that Jan Blachowicz has become an enduring light heavyweight contender. He's really good. He's actually really good.
Yeah, he's genuinely decent. And
downgraded.
It seemed that he was one of those fighters who was just going to be eternally stuck in one position. Because he was one of those guys who could hurt people but not finish them.
Yep.
And then didn't have the gas tank to survive even a 3-round fight.
Yeah, he would lose the same way every time.
Yeah. You were just oh well, that's the end of you then. He was someone I seriously expected to literally wash out of the UFC at one point.
At one point, he was on a 1-4 run.
Yeah. I mean, Patrick Cummings, is he still in the UFC?
I don't believe he is
he
anymore.
Retired?
I think so, yes. Although by now he's probably had an entire secondary career in bare knuckle FC, but nominally I think he is retired from MMA. Gustafsson?
Yes, he has the facial hair for it, but perhaps not the striking defense.
Gustafsson, where Blachowicz, like, the first, I think, twinklings of how great he could be were in that fight. And Gustafsson is now washed out. Blachowicz is still here and much better than he was then. Much more capable of doing what he did to Gustafsson for 3 rounds, actually. In fact, I would have loved to have been vindicated, by having that fight rematched, like last year or the year before, just before Gustafsson completely fell apart. Yeah, I mean, Blachowicz has just turned into a great fighter, to be honest. By the standards of the light heavyweight division, he's seriously shored up his takedown defense and general wrestling acumen. He is so much more committed to landing his jab and to being tricky with it. He's much more active with the feints. I love the fact that his jab is tied in to his footwork. So the weapon that he's most comfortable using, the one that's easiest to land, is the one that allows him to get away, to get out from in front of aggressive opponents by pivoting off as he throws it. And the like really weird, not necessarily good defense, but the super accurate, powerful counterpunching combinations, particularly the counter uppercuts. And as we just saw against Rockhold, but also the last fight against Corey Anderson, an increasingly deadly left hook. Was always a good punch for Blachowicz, but it has been a money punch recently. And I'm just sad because I don't know that all of that is going to be enough to beat Dominic Reyes. I just don't know.
It has to be.
You think so?
It has to be. I'm not accepting this. I've said this before.
Make the case.
On multiple occasions. We picked Dominic Reyes to beat John Jones. For many
right.
people, that engenders a kind of loyalty to pick an upset, which then sort of pretty much comes to fruition. I think most people will agree that Reyes did win that fight.
Mm-hmm.
It has not engendered any loyalty for me. I don't want Dominic Reyes to become UFC light heavyweight champion. He's not funny enough.
I know what I was going to phrase it differently, but I know what your issue is. He's too good. He's too just competent.
Yeah, he's just fine. What's funny about him? He's got a really long back. His ears stick out. This is bullshit.
Those are good starts, but
no,
they don't exactly stand out in this sport.
Yeah. No. And he's fighting a man who, as we mentioned, got thoroughly outworked down the stretch by Patrick Cummings, who was put under, folded under the pressure of a kneeless Jimmy Manuwa, who had, back in the day, a TKO loss to an aging Ramo Thierry Sokoju.
Yeah.
These are the kind of people I want to see fighting for my light heavyweight belt.
Yeah.
Not some prospect who comes up and everyone's like, oh, that's a good prospect. And then he develops in the ways that you would like and expect to see from a prospect. And then he fights for the belt and wins.
Yeah.
No.
A kickboxer whose entire pre-UFC career is armbar finishes over journeyman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is my light heavyweight champion. I agree with the sentiment. I definitely agree with it. But I can't allow emotion to cloud my judgment here, Phil. I simply will not. You volatile English. You're famous for letting your passions command your every decision, but not us, rational, cool-headed, stiff-lipped Americans. I don't know. Make the case. Other than an appeal to sympathy. What does Blachowicz do that Reyes is tactically going to struggle with?
Okay, there are genuinely a few things. I mean, I still don't trust Blachowicz to win to be able to go deep. I don't trust his gas tank, really. All his long fights have been incredibly measured. I don't expect him to be that great in a long fight. Doesn't matter. This is 3 rounds.
And Reyes is kind of the same, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like Reyes, I do trust Reyes' gas tank more than Blachowicz. I mean, getting outworked down the stretch by John Jones happens to literally everyone.
Sure.
But Blachowicz has a few things going for him. He is a better jabber than Jones. Primarily, he is actually, whilst we've said that he's not actually a great defensive fighter, he does take his head off the center line when he jabs.
Mm-hmm.
He's a much more, I think, active jabber than Jones was in that fight.
And like I said, he moves his feet. He moves his whole position when he jabs too. So he's constantly, as he's being effective and initiating exchanges, he's constantly subtly adjusting the angle at which he exits or resets.
Yep. He's a much better counterpuncher than John Jones is. I think if he's going to be playing a jab left hook counter game, I think he's just better at that than Jones is.
Mm-hmm.
Don't feel that's particularly controversial to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main problem is obviously that Reyes is extremely mobile, and Blachowicz has been known to chase people.
Yes, we call it
in Thiago Santos' fight.
We call it the Blocko Blitz, and it's he can't deny his instinct to do it. This is the thing. I'm very tempted to pick Blachowicz because the way to win this fight is there. Like, Reyes is sort of uniquely comfortable being on the back foot for this division. He doesn't mind being there at all. He's going to allow Blachowicz to pressure, and Blachowicz can do that with his jab, with his feints, and he is also a quick and pretty powerful kicker. And these are great weapons to have at that range. Not that Reyes doesn't also have, kicks and jabs. In particular, his jab looked much better than it ever has in periods of the John Jones fight. But that's the kind of fight that Blachowicz can win on points. The thing is if he's winning that fight, he won't be able to stop himself from committing to at least 4 Blocko blitzes. It's a given. He was having good success against Thiago Santos at range. Nope. Ran in and got countered to pieces. And Dominic Reyes is the division's best counterpuncher. Probably the heaviest handed and just technically the best counterpuncher. So, I'm gonna pick him, I think. I think I have to pick him, Phil.
That's because you're a son of a bitch. No, I'm gonna believe that light heavyweight is fueled by dumbness.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And
yeah, that's true.
And that this guy is gonna find out that, just because like someone has a terrible early career doesn't mean that they're not now okay enough to win a incredibly controversial decision based on a few strikes, which is what I would sort of expect to happen if, as I suspect you might be right, Jan doesn't get knocked out by like just running onto Reyes' fist.
Yeah.
Because Jones against Reyes, he did put himself in range a lot. I mean, Jones is typically, and I think Jones was much more, he tried to be more aggressive than he was in the Santos fight.
Oh yeah.
But, so I think he did give, Reyes a lot of opportunities to, basically get strikes off. But I don't think, if Blachowicz fights, quote unquote, the right fight, it may be kind of low volume.
Sure.
It may not be a pretty fight to watch.
I think it'll be an interesting low volume fight though. There will be a lot happening in the spaces.
Yeah.
I don't disagree. There will probably be a lot of spaces, but I think that what's happening in them is going to be interesting. It's going to be Blachowicz trying to throw off Reyes' timing. I love to see counterpunchers being faced with jabs and feints, and seeing how they deal with these things. I absolutely, undeniably be Reyes' stiffest test in that regard ever. So yeah, I'm actually very interested. I don't mind the idea that this fight is kind of slow. I want to see what adaptations Reyes can come up with, because if it's slow, basically that means that I think Blachowicz is succeeding in stifling Reyes' opportunities to come back. He's probably keeping him on the back foot. And I think it's certainly possible that Blachowicz sort of wins the first half of the fight and then just gets knocked out. Just like the Santos fight. So that's what I'm predicting. I think Reyes is going to knock him out in, let's say, the third round. Sorry, Phil.
Well, I'm going to pick Big Jan, the famous person who is good at winning 3 rounds decisions, to win a 3-round decision.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that when Dominic Reyes gets folded up Luke Rockhold style, his back is long enough that his nose touches the tops of his feet? Do you think he just folds in half perfectly at the hip? It's just 50-50 on either side of his ass. He's like a lawn chair. I think that I hope to see it.
Entirely possible.
I hope to see it. I hope you're right. But I will point out that your pick is based almost entirely on passion and resentment, and it's very little to do with what Blachowicz actually does with range fights that he is comfortably winning.
You shut up.
Okay. All right. Let's take a break. We're gonna watch we're gonna make up by watching the Rockhold Blachowicz GIF a couple dozen more times. That's going to be on one of our Twitters, by the way. So if you're listening to this and you want to see that, go to @BoxingBush or @EvilGregJackson on Twitter and laugh with us. Until then, let's take a break. When we come back, more from the undercard. Kai Kara-France versus Brandon Royval. Very interesting matchup there. And Brad Riddell versus Alex Da Silva. After this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Alright, welcome back to Heavy Hands. It's Kai Kara-France versus Brandon Royval next up on the docket, followed by Brad Riddell versus Alex Da Silva. I think, unsurprisingly for a card that, while not taking place in New Zealand, is still aimed at the Israel Adesanya market, all the City Kickboxing boys are here, and Kara-France and Riddell, both obvious examples. Riddell seems perhaps poised to be the next championship caliber, although that is a very difficult thing to say in the lightweight division. But it may be following a bit of the kind of fast track that really all the City Kickboxing super athletes have followed, those being Volkanovski and Adesanya, of just rapidly rounding out their games, getting more confident, and then using these high level kickboxing skills to both neutralize and beat the shit out of people. But I really think I should have been this entire time paying more attention to Kai Kara-France, because not only is he just a guaranteed fun fighter to watch, I don't feel that I've in my heart I have not given him enough credit for that over the years, but he pretty much always turns in an entertaining fight. But more than that, he is by far the most it's him and Dan Hooker. They're the bang average guys, as far as these things go at City Kickboxing. You know, relative to the likes of Adesanya and Volkanovski and Riddell, they don't have that degree of athleticism. Kai Kara-France is fairly quick and explosive, but has very short arms and is a short little guy. And of course, Dan Hooker is the exact opposite, but has none of the speed, and pop of an Israel Adesanya. None of the reflexes either. But Kai Kara-France, like, Phil, you and I have said this on numerous occasions that, we like to look at the, like, mid-tier guys to get a true assessment of the quality of a camp. And I think we can say in Kai Kara-France, and this is going to blow some minds, City Kickboxing is a pretty good camp. I know, please calm yourself. Here's the thing though, as you pointed out to me just a moment ago, and I just rewatched it and loved every moment of it. Not only has Kai Kara-France like had to learn on the job over the course of his career, he took a lot of early losses. He fought a lot in like Southeast Asia and stuff against just a wide variety of relative unknowns and lost to many of them. So not only have we already had it proven basically that he can work his way forward, that he can improve his game in the same way that all the more gifted City Kickboxing guys have, but his most recent fight against Tyson Nam, probably his best yet. Probably his most subtle and layered and creative performance, mixing up his timing, using his lead hand in a myriad of ways, throwing the jab, throwing away the jab, feinting and setting up the left hook, touching, pawing, stabbing, all the things a lead hand can and should do. It was doing for him in that fight. And then there's the fact that as a counterpuncher, Kara-France is often on the back foot. He's always been really good at knowing, when that moment comes where he can no longer stay committed to the retreat. He's got to drop his weight and throw back. But there were new layers even to that aspect of his game against Tyson Nam. He was being really sort of clever and tricky with how he would initiate these attacks. He would drop his weight, set his feet, and then do a little leg feint, and then come in with a quick jab upstairs. Or he would counter Nam coming in with a right hand that was blocked, and then without changing his body position at all, just quickly stuck the right hand out a second time to take advantage of the new opening that had appeared after the first one was blocked. Clever, subtle, creative stuff from a guy who is not a Brad Riddell level prospect, and is at this point quite a veteran actually. And he's taken on Brandon Royval, who is just like excitement defined basically. He's got that kind of style where absolutely whatever you bring to him, he's going to give you something back. You know what just occurs to me, Phil? I've talked myself to this conclusion. Could this be boring? Like, relatively.
No, I don't think so.
Probably not, right? But the thing is Royval is not... I don't think he's a fighter who shines in terms of bringing his fight to the opponent. I mean, I assume he'll be content to come forward and make things happen if, as usual, Kara-France stays mostly on the back foot. But there is an interesting dynamic here where Kara-France is undeniably at his best as a counterpuncher, and he knows it. That's his process. And Royval is like a scrambling, opportunistic submission guy / tall man pocket combination puncher who basically relies on his opponent to bring the fight to him in order to find his openings. So I don't know. Outside chance. You don't think so?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always an outside chance. I mean, that's why that Nam fight stood out to me so much, and why when you were asking me, you were saying, so how are you going to pick this? And I was just like, I'm going to pick Kai Kara-France. Mm-hmm. That's what I wanted. Because of that Nam fight, and because I was expecting that to be a stinker. Mm-hmm. Because Tyson Nam is, for a flyweight, or indeed for a lot of weight classes, pretty glacially slow-paced. And Kai Kara-France tends to just sit back and look for his perfect opportunity. But I think it genuinely was a bit of a turnaround for him where, as you mentioned, all those things where he was making his own opportunities throughout the course of the fight. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I have more confidence in Kai Kara-France if you give him a defensive blank slate that he's actually going to work on it. And Royval, I mean, and also, as a counterpuncher, I think Royval is aggressive enough. I mean, one of the things in that fight, for example, against Tim Elliott, he certainly didn't, when Tim Elliott was thoroughly out wrestling him, he certainly didn't stop coming forward.
No, he
He
didn't.
didn't start just like backing up to the fence. He was just like, no, I'm still going to keep doing this. And to his weird credit, he managed to exhaust him, Elliott, and then arm triangle him.
Yeah, you're right about that. There are moments where he gets up and lands a jab and then comes forward and like throws a kick that whizzes over Elliott's head as he drops for another low single. He's just forcing the fight. Yeah, I think you're right. Thank goodness. You know, my inner pessimist, Phil, sometimes it just takes charge and I don't know what to tell it, but that's why I have you around. I think I agree with your assessment. I was coming into this one being pretty uncertain, but I think you framed it the right way. Kai Kara-France, the improvement we saw against Tyson M was specifically in creating his own opportunities. And yeah, I just like that added layer of subtlety to set up what was already like a well-considered but pretty meat and potatoes like power counterpunching game. Yeah, I'm into it. But Kai Kara-France feels like a good pick. All right, well, what about the one who is, the coming man at City Kickboxing? Brad Riddell, the man who has turned all of the fight site riders into coming men in a different way, is taking on Alex De Silva, who is nicknamed Lecco after, it's Stefan Lecco, right? The kickboxer?
Possibly.
I know it's the kickboxer. I was just trying to remember his name. It's Stefan Lecco, right? Pretty sure it's Stefan Lecco. We're going to run with Stefan Lecco. So, I don't know if this is really a step up. I think it's reasonable for Riddell, who is still, given how good he's looked so far, is still remarkably inexperienced as an MMA fighter. Of course, like Adesanya, he's got a kickboxing background, but his pro debut, well, it was back in 2013, but then he really didn't start fighting MMA in earnest until 2016. I think it's reasonable, honestly, for him to be sort of fighting, level. I think this is honestly in many ways a step down from Magomed Mustafayev, who is like a physical freak and a terrifying presence in the cage. So other than just straight up picking Brad Riddell, tell me what the fight looks like.
This is a weird one because De Silva's sort of shown that he can be outworked and out wrestled by large people like Alexander Yakovlev. But conversely, he looked pretty decent as a striker in his fight after that, which was against, who was it again?
It's Kozula Vargas, I think.
Yeah. I mean, showed a, nice long jab, looked reasonably active, kept the lateral movement going. I mean, it's hard to see that really helping, it's hard to see that really working that well against Riddell. Riddell has very good defense. He punches in combination. He goes to the body, which I think will work super well against a big tall guy like De Silva.
Yeah.
He's got a very upright stance, and frankly, I think many MMA fighters are simply shocked by body shots.
It's absolutely true.
So I think this is definitely a significant step down. I mean, I don't know why the UFC tends to be like, oh, we've got a fun technical kickboxing prospect. Let's see if we can get Magomed Mustafayev to spin kick his head off. I mean, look at how it took some time for Rafael Fiziev to recover after that particular booking.
Yeah,
and Riddell did beat Mustafayev, but it was a close run thing.
Yeah, narrowly he beat him. I think you said this before. I mean, I think we are going to see a much different Brad Riddell in the coming years. I think he's gonna follow a track like teammate Adesanya before him. Also like Volkanovski, or you might compare him to Joanna Jędrzejczyk, whose kickboxing game, the game she brought from her background, changed significantly in the first few years of MMA to account for the new threats she had to deal with. But once she was comfortable with those threats, once they were incorporated into her sort of mental defensive flowchart, every aspect of her kickboxing game came back. and honestly, like, improved and found new applications in this sport. I think, I think, like you said, Riddell was very, very conscious of the threat of a takedown and the strength of Mustafayev on the ground and in the scrambles if that were to happen. And understandably, like you said, it's a fucking nightmare opponent for like your second UFC fight to be taking on this disgusting, hairy muscle freak who just like tears people's heads off and drinks vodka out of the skulls. So yeah, I don't know. The thing is I don't know if this is that point, but maybe that's the idea. You know, we gave him the really stiff test. Now let's see if he can comfortably build on it, because Lecco, Da Silva does not bring that kind of takedown threat. He is a competent submission grappler, certainly, but it's largely him shutting down takedowns and allowing other people to initiate those grappling exchanges. And I think the big thing is just how much more rote he is as a striker than Riddell. Riddell has, even from his very first UFC fight, he had that layered approach that Volkanovski and Adesanya have made like so attractive in their fights. He had the feints, he had the jabs, he had all of these tricky entries and these are also things, as we said previously in the episode, that can be interspersed in the midst of a combination. He's able to break rhythm, is what I'm really trying to say. And Alex Da Silva is, shall we say, a metronomic combination puncher. He's a heavy bag hitter. It's pretty much right, left, right, left. If it's a punch combination that sets up a kick, which it often does because he's got kind of a Dutch style, then it's a kick off the left side following a right hand, or a kick off the right side following a left hook. And the tempo is very, very predictable. So while they're relatively fearsome punches and they're well considered combinations, all the shots go together well. If we're talking about him exchanging these sorts of punches with a Riddell who is comfortable enough about the takedown threat at this point and against this opponent to engage in deeper and deeper exchanges, it's pretty hard to imagine Riddell not flatlining Da Silva at some point or another.
Yeah. I think it's interesting the way that he's reacted to, I think, being transplanted to MMA, because Jędrzejczyk, for example, her reaction was to fold parts of her toolset away.
Right.
Which it was primarily her kicks, but I don't think Riddell was ever like a huge kicker.
Yeah.
So his main adaptation has been pace.
Yes.
Because he was as I think you said before we started recording, a pretty violent and fast-paced kickboxer.
Yes.
And has been much more measured, much more on the sort of Jose Aldo tip in this UFC run.
If I hadn't seen it from high level, if I hadn't seen it from high level kickboxers before, I would call it what we've seen so far a worryingly low pace.
Yeah, but we can tell that like with this isn't the Jose Aldo problem, because you can tell from the Mustafayev fight, it's not that he's worried about conserving energy.
Yeah,
because the Mustafayev fight was not high pace in terms of strikes thrown, but it was extremely physical.
Yes.
It was just grappling the whole time with a huge Hulk man. And Riddell easily ended up on the like winning end of the cardio equation.
Yeah.
So it's not the Aldo problem. And it's, you can see from his kickboxing career, he is a much faster paced fighter than this. So yeah, it's going to be great to see if this is the kind of, we're going to see him to start, like, expand outwards. And as we've seen from the city kickboxing guys, I think we can expect to see that, as we've seen from, like, I think I mentioned him before as he was the other, like, stupidly matched up person with Mustafayev. This is going to be, I think, probably the Fiziev versus Alex White fight. Is that, like,
the coming out party?
We threw you at the insane unwinnable matchup. Now, have now just have a slightly unstructured striker to style up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds about right. I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm quite Vaping a Scooter Gang excited, but I am excited for Brad Riddell. It's been a while since we've done an interview on this show. We should try to get the City Kickboxing people on. Like, it's just a really good MMA team. There's some aspect to their approach, like Fortis. There's some aspect to their approach which is like a one-size-fits-all understanding of how variables work in MMA, where their fighters are like uniquely comfortable adapting to all of the defensive worries that MMA fighters have to deal with. And basically that's true in almost every fight I can think of, except Adesanya Romero, where he was completely flummoxed by the fact that anything could happen at any moment. But it is a real strength of that team that over and over we see fighters go in there. They have a complete skill set. They have a slight hitch as they learn how to apply it to MMA. But then, like, what team is better at bringing kickboxers in and having them look like kickboxers in MMA fights? I can't think of one that has done that as consistently as these guys.
Yeah, I mean, the next best would be, I don't know, Tiger Muay Thai?
Maybe.
Like,
yeah.
Maybe? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe like, I don't know, like Rumble Academy, I think, and like Denmark has a few kickboxers. Maybe there aren't any that just this consistently take like high level professional kickboxers and turn them into MMA fighters who still fight like kickboxers. So it rules. Brad Riddell is probably going to flatten Alex De Silva, and it's going to be entertaining the whole way. And that's basically it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. UFC 253 is the one. It's a hell of a good main card, folks. I hope you could sense the rare enthusiasm pouring out of the two of us over the course of this episode. And make sure you go check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. You will either see, by the time this is posted, a bonus heavy bag in which we answer questions from our patrons. And if you do see that, or even if you don't, and you're at the $5 level, you should send us more questions, because we're going to try and do that much, much more regularly. Basically it's an easy way for us to get you guys the promised amount of bonus content, which has not always happened with this show. And, we owe it to you to answer your questions. And it's fun. And if you don't see that, then you may see a discussion of Covington Woodley and its undercard. We have yet to discuss it, so I don't know if that's going to be there or not. But otherwise, Phil, anything to plug before we get out of here?
Well, as I might have mentioned last week, the toe-to-toes will be coming back. At least
that's right.
Pay-per-view main events. So myself and David Castillo will be breaking down Costa and Adesanya, which should be great fun and will give me more chances to make puerile jokes about how sexy they find each other.
Nice. I'm going to go ahead and shout out one of the oft-mentioned and oft-feared Vaping a Scooter Gang. In fact, I think a new inductee. I didn't. Hopefully this isn't offensive to say. I didn't know this man before I read this article, but Aiden Hayes wrote a piece called Israel Adesanya Ringcraft in MMA, which is very good. And that is on the fight site. That's on the fightsite.com.
I've also read that. It was very, very good.
Yes, very solid breakdown. I'm going to break my new rule, by the way, but it's pretty much finished. So also keep your eyes peeled this week for an article entitled Kevin Holland, a Hero for the Crowdless Age. The only fighter whose fights have genuinely gotten more entertaining in the absence of crowds. There's pros and cons to the silent arena ambiance, but Kevin Holland is the one man whose fights are better when you can hear all the shit he's saying. And these last two fights have been like prime examples of just how entertaining he is when you can hear the dialogue. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That should be coming up on bloodyelbow.com. Find us on social media. Phil's at Evil Greg Jackson, myself at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And check out the Heavy Hands Patreon, $3 for all the bonus episodes, $5 if you want to get in on some of those heavy bag questions and answers, which we are going to make a concerted effort to do more often. And until next week, when we will, I'm sure, have a very exciting, and if not, a very angry recap of whatever happens in Adesanya versus Costa. It'll be heated no matter what happens. Until then, thank you all for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.